What if I told you Formula One's darkest weekend didn't begin with Ayrton Senna, but with the man who died the day before him? From Russell Phillips' horrifying NASCAR crash to Takashi Yokoyama's fiery end in Japan. This is the most horrific racing instant deaths ever. And these are the moments that should never be forgotten. October 6, 1995. Charlotte Motor Speedway. The Winston 100 was supposed to be Russell Phillips' moment. In fact, the 26-year-old had just won his first pole position 2 days earlier, setting a lap speed of 157 miles per hour. For a volunteer firefighter and youth minister from Mint Hill, North Carolina, this was the breakthrough he'd been working toward. They called him Bubby because of his imposing stature. However, everyone who knew Russell Phillips knew he was anything but intimidating. He was kind. He was gentle. On this Friday afternoon, he led the first 2 laps before settling into 10th position. Then came lap 17. 2 cars spun ahead in turn 4. As a result, Stephen Howard, just 21 years old, swerved high to avoid them. Unfortunately, Phillips was directly behind. Their wheels made contact. And what happened next defies comprehension. Specifically, Howard's momentum sent both cars climbing the banking and into the steel catch fence. Consequently, Phillips' Oldsmobile went onto its right side. Then it slammed roof first into the barrier at full speed. The roof peeled away like paper. In 1995, NASCAR cars lacked the Earnhardt Bar. The roof support was made mandatory just months later. As a result, Phillips' roll cage collapsed completely. The car dragged along the fence for over 100 feet, and when it finally came to rest, there was nothing left where the roof had been. Subsequently, track president Humpy Wheeler and NASCAR director Gary Nelson arrived at the scene. What they found stunned even veteran officials. The crowd fell into stunned silence. In fact, it lasted over 30 minutes. Meanwhile, safety workers held up massive yellow tarps to shield spectators from the carnage scattered along the track. In addition, white sheets marked locations where remains had been found. Over a dozen officials examined the wreck, permitting just one photographer. Phillips died instantly. The official reports were clear about that. However, the brutality of what occurred on that October afternoon would haunt Charlotte Motor Speedway forever. It was the 3rd Sportsman Division driver killed at the track in just 6 years. As a result, Wheeler called it the last straw. By 1996, Charlotte withdrew from hosting sportsman races entirely. But who knew just a few years later, at Indianapolis, another driver would pay the ultimate price? Gordon Smiley made a promise. Specifically, he told his car owner Bob Fletcher he was going to qualify at 200 miles per hour for the 1982 Indianapolis 500. Or die trying. Smiley was a brilliant road racer. In fact, he'd won championships in SCCA Formula Ford. He'd conquered British Formula One racing, even claiming a victory at Silverstone in 1979. He knew how to handle a race car. Yet Indianapolis was different. In other words, the oval demanded different instincts, different reactions. And on May 15, 1982, those instincts would betray him. Rick Mears had shattered qualifying records that morning, averaging over 207 miles per hour. As a result, the speeds were climbing. And as the line between glory and disaster thinning, Smiley climbed into his Fletcher Racing March Cosworth at 12:15 p.m. but never completed his qualifying run. Approaching turn 3 on his second warm-up lap, the rear of his car began to slide. It was simple oversteering, the kind of movement Smiley had corrected thousands of times before. Instinctively, his road racing reflexes took over. He turned the wheel right to catch the slide. However, at Indianapolis, at nearly 200 miles per hour, those instincts were lethal. The front tires suddenly gripped. As a result, the car snapped violently inward. Smiley had no time to react. His March hit the concrete retaining wall head-on at approximately 195 to 200 miles per hour. The impact was catastrophic. The chassis exploded on contact, the fuel tank erupted in flames, the car disintegrated into 3 large sections and hundreds of smaller pieces. And debris flew at least 50 feet into the air, littering the track across the short chute connecting turns 3 and 4. Smiley's body tumbled through the wreckage, broken and exposed. Dr. Steve Olvey, the CART medical director, was among the first to reach the scene. When he reached Smiley's body, the helmet was gone. So was the top of the skull. The Speedway went silent. Later, track announced the news 33 minutes after impact. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is with our deepest regrets that we announce the passing of Gordon Smiley." The cleanup took over 2 hours, repairing the fencing, patching the track, and removing debris. Gordon Smiley died chasing 200 miles per hour. In other words, he died doing exactly what he'd promised. But it was not the end. Formula One hadn't seen death in over a decade. 12 years of safety. 12 years of improvement. However, that illusion shattered on April 30th, 1994. Ratzenberger, the 33-year-old Austrian, had fought for years to reach Formula One. He'd won in Formula Ford, conquered the festival at Brands Hatch, and proven himself in touring cars and sports car endurance racing. Finally, in 1994, he secured a seat with the tiny Simtek team. His Formula One career lasted 3 race weekends. Imola was already tense. In fact, the day before, Rubens Barrichello had crashed horrifically at 140 miles per hour, his Jordan flying into barriers and flipping violently. Somehow, Barrichello walked away, but danger still lurked. During Saturday qualifying, Ratzenberger was battling for the 26th and final grid position. He'd set a time of 1 minute 27.58 for seconds. In fact, it would have been enough. However, he wanted more. On his previous lap, he clipped a curb at Acqua Mignoli corner. Consequently, the impact damaged his front wing. Instead of pitting, he pushed for one final flying lap. Approaching the Villeneuve kink at 195 miles per hour, the damaged wing failed and bolts sheared. As a result, the wing detached and lodged under the nose, lifting the front wheels off the asphalt. Therefore, Ratzenberger suddenly had no steering. No brakes. Just velocity. His Simtek went straight into the exposed concrete wall. The medical crews reached him within a minute. They attempted resuscitation on the track. But the injuries were catastrophic. Namely, a basilar skull fracture, severe chest trauma, a ruptured aorta. Any one would have been fatal. Ratzenberger was airlifted to Maggiore Hospital in Bologna, but he was pronounced dead at 2:15 p.m. He was 34 years old. But some crashes are so unthinkable that they seem impossible. Until they happen. It was October 19, 1997. Fuji Speedway. The final round of the All Japan Formula 3 Championship. Takashi Yokoyama, just 25 years old, started from 17th position. He'd returned to Japan after racing in British Formula 3, settling for an older spec Dallara with the Dome Racing team. His season had been modest. 1 9th place finish. Mostly retirements. At turn 1, disaster struck ahead. The Dutch racer Tom Coronel and Japanese driver Shigekazu Wakisaka made contact under braking. As a result, Wakisaka's car launched into the air, flipping twice before landing partially on Coronel's machine. Both cars ended up in the gravel. However, both drivers, miraculously, walked away uninjured, and the safety car was immediately deployed. The field bunched up along the front straight, slowing to cautionary speeds. Yet Yokoyama, running back in the pack, was traveling at 160 miles per hour when the yellow flags appeared. Whether he didn't see them or couldn't react in time remains unknown. What happened next defies even physics. Before he could brake, Yokoyama's Dallara slammed into a slowing car ahead. The impact launched him airborne. His car flew upward, climbing higher and higher. Then it struck the overhead gantry holding the main straight signboard, suspended 16 feet above the track. The Formula 3 car disintegrated on impact and the cockpit shredded. The roll hoop destroyed, the monocoque torn apart in an instant. As a result, debris scattered over 500 meters. Meanwhile, Yokoyama's body suffered a brainstem contusion and massive trauma. He died instantly, his car falling in pieces back to the pavement. The race was immediately red-flagged. In addition, officials cancelled the remaining laps. Moreover, they cancelled the event entirely. There was nothing left to race for. In other words, nothing left but the impossible reality that a racing car had flown into a signboard and a young driver was gone. For drivers. For instant deaths. For moments that changed racing forever. They died pursuing what they loved. And because they died, others lived. In other words, that's progress written in tragedy and safety built on sacrifice.